Okay, far away.
Cool. So with the mixer,
Yep.
like I was saying, best to work in the same way, sort of systematically. So try and work from the top down. So we'll start at the trim. We'll do these after. The trim I normally set to around 10 to quarter to. So a decent level. We'll be able to see on the meters if we're getting a signal through, but it's not going to come through too loud and clip or distort. The EQs, we set those all back to 12 o'clock. And then same with the sound color effects, all back to 12 o'clock.
Yep.
And then if you do see anything that's switched on the mixer and flashing, like our sound color effects here,
Yep.
or our beat effects down here, we just make sure that those are switched off so that they're not engaged. And the same with this, we just make sure that the level is turned down. We've got our volume down, and then here we've got our crossfader assignment. So we can just make sure that they're all set to through so that our crossfader isn't active when we start playing. And then the next thing I do is play a track and look to see if I'm getting a signal through. So at the moment we're not getting anything. So I would look at my input selectors. So here we've got this deck plugged into channel 3. I just go through and start trying all the inputs until I get a signal through. And then we could raise the volume, see if anything happens. Nothing happens at the moment. I'd drop that back down, and then I'd be checking my master volume. So that's turned down. You can turn it to roughly the same position as our trims, and then so there we're getting the signal through. We can hear the music, but it's only coming through one speaker. So then I check my balance, just make sure that that's in the center, and now everything is good to go. So just down here we've got this section. So this applies to the EQs, the channel faders, and the crossfader. Crossfader we don't really need to worry about because we're not using it, but this just adjusts the curve of it. So here we get a really sharp curve. So basically as soon as I move the crossfader over, if it was engaged, I'd hear the signal straight away. Here is like a nice mix of the two, so it will gently fade in, and then over on the right is a really long fade. But like I was saying, we don't need to worry about that. Here we've got a similar thing for the channel fader. So this one, we get a nice long sort of linear fade. There is halfway, and then there is a really sharp cut. So this part of the fader is almost inactive. It's not until we get to around here that we hear the signal, and then from around here we get a kick and the signal jumps in. So depending on what you're doing, if you're like mixing really quickly and chopping and cutting stuff in, you'll probably have it on a really sharp curve. But I tend to just leave it in the middle so that I've got the best of both. And then here we've got our EQ curve. So we've got isolator and standard EQ. So on here, we'll look on this channel because you can see a bit better. We've got our two values. We've got minus 26 decibels and infinity. So the standard EQ is going to cut that frequency range down to minus 26, and then anything that's after minus 26 gets left behind. So if I turn all these down, that's the track after my high, mid and low has been cut to minus 26. So we still get a little bit of it left behind. And then if I switch it to isolator, basically it's going to work on the basis of infinite cut. So it's going to cut as much of that frequency range as possible without cutting into the other frequencies. So it's going to cut all the bass it can without cutting into the mid and the high. So then if I do the same with the mid and with the high, we lose everything altogether. So depending on what you're doing, it will kind of dictate what EQ curve you use. So with electronic and dance music, I tend to have it on isolator because it's almost, I don't know, some cases it's quite sterile, quite cold feeling. But with things like funk, disco, soul, like analog sort of music, I tend to leave it on the standard EQ. So it retains some of that warmth. And that is it.
Excellent.
For the mixer.